This is what happens when tensions boil over, when anger takes over.
Ferguson was a spark that certainly outraged a greater part of America.
But what deserves a closer look is what's underneath.
You know, we are basically still in the civil rights struggle.
A culmination of frustration over issues that many minority communities face, including those in Colorado.
We're at a really critical time for conversation.
So we began a conversation with community leaders and activists, asking what they think are the biggest issues in minority communities. It's a big question with no shortage of answers, beginning with education.
The graduation rates are horrible. I mean, you're talking less than 50% even here in Colorado for boys of color.
As an educator and founder of the Sims-Fayola International Academy, Dedrick Sims has seen the first-hand deficits in education for minorities.
They walk through the doors 3 and 4 and 5 grade levels behind.
Not helped, he says, by linear ways of teaching that don't take into account families and tough circumstances. But fixing education doesn't fix everything else.
When you tell us that we need to be educated and therefore we will get more jobs, that's not true.
So says community advocate Barbara Jones, who puts economic inequities at the top of her list.
But unemployment rate is lower. Home ownership is lower.
The same type of economic disparities echoed by Republican political analyst Ryan Frazier.
There's a huge gap. White business owners, on average, small business owners bring in over $400,000 on average. If you look at black business owners, small black business owners, that number is below 80,000.
If education and the economy rank as the first two challenges, he says political engagement is right up there with them. An issue that his Democratic counterpart, James Mejia, agrees is a problem.
Well, people of color are not as big a participant as they need to be. You can't create your own destiny unless you are part of the government that is working on the public policy that affects your community. I think the root of all this is our system of education.
Frazier, on the other hand, points back to the economy.
Oftentimes, minority communities aren't seeing a lot of the same benefit that other communities are.
Not trusting that they'll get the same benefit. Trust is an issue elsewhere, too.
Not the best relationship with the police department.
Denver Police Chief Robert White says trust issues between police and some minority communities can come from questions over police actions.
And a lot of times citizens ask themselves, how come that officer didn't get indicted? How come that officer didn't get fired?
And a lack of communication.
We send police officers in those areas, hey, you need to eradicate this issue. You need to get aggressive and get those criminal elements out there.
That aggressive policing, some say, is another problem.
Aggressively stopping people for low-level offenses. We saw this with the Eric Gardner case in New York. So he was stopped for selling cigarettes.
A situation that escalated into a deadly confrontation. Lisa Calderon of the Colorado Latino Forum says it also leads to higher incarceration rates for minorities.
Black and Latino males in particular are at the higher rate of being contacted by police, a higher rate of being stopped and searched, higher rate of being prosecuted.
Just one in a list of concerns from minorities who say these issues affect everyone.
Because it's an American issue. I mean, we should all care about Americans.
Taronda Thomas, 9 News.
It's a focus on the fabric of a culture, a varied combination of music, food, and history coming together during Hispanic Heritage Month from September 15th to October 15th. The 4 weeks meant to coincide with the Independence Days of more than a half dozen Latin American countries, including Mexico, Chile, and Costa Rica.
I think the big thing is to try to recognize the culture of folks of Hispanic Latino origin and the types of contributions they've made to the United States.
Carlos Hipólito Delgado is an associate professor at CU Denver, specializing in the development of ethnic identities.
We acknowledge it as a month. It really forces it. It kind of brings it to the forefront.
Here in Denver, Hispanics have been part of the city from its earliest days, including the Auraria neighborhood, where a few of the city's oldest homes still stand. Hipólito Delgado says many years later, a month to celebrate Hispanic heritage helps encourage a sharing of all our cultures.
Learn about your own, that's important, but learn about other cultures as well, and that's going to make you a better professional, and I think a better human being overall.
We have been spreading the news about people of color since 1987.
Newspaper publishers see it all.
I always say that we're a recorder of history.
But there's one thing this publisher has never seen.
I am totally blown away about that.
In fact, not too many people, period, have seen this.
This was phenomenal.
tucked away on the 5th floor of the Denver Public Library, its delicate pages protected.
It's so historical.
Long forgotten features and faces
She just looks familiar.
of color.
It's unbelievable.
It was called the Denver Star, circa 1913. This newspaper had the type of news that wasn't in other papers.
Those papers all over the world have been the ones to tell the story of what was happening in the African American community. What happened with a political candidate, who had a fancy tea, who got married.
Historians trace African American newspapers as far back as the days of slavery.
They have been going since the early 1800s.
2 centuries later,
Interesting to look at this.
this newspaper inspires a 21st century publisher, B. Harris of Denver Urban Spectrum.
There was a need there, and that was phenomenal.
So who was behind these stories?
You know what? That says a supplement. So I was wondering if that was a Black-owned publication.
A family donated the paper to the library. One of the only things researchers have figured out is that the issue was for a convention of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. It featured prominent Denver African Americans
It's got Madam C.J. Walker in there.
and some articles
This story I thought was very interesting.
that may not make modern day headlines.
It's called Denver's Great Sanitarium.
People showing off houses
To own a home was the epitome of being in the middle class.
and hairdos.
Look at the hair.
This is the only copy in the Denver City Archives.
I wish there were more issues that we could find.
It's as if the Star vanished, and that's the danger many newspapers face now.
The changing of times and the changing of technology, it's like, well, how do we move forward with this?
There's a reason this modern day publisher finds inspiration in these pages.
But we do need it.
This faded star is a reminder to let no story go untold, no face be forgotten.
To tell our stories. We have to tell our stories. I don't think anyone else will.
It is a place not well traveled. Desolate. Isolated. It is a path that thousands were forced to take. It is one filled with painful memories.
The guard towers are really frightening. We heard rumors about this, about the guards being trigger happy, and why was he training his light on me?
Yet those memories are what bring them back.
I really wanted my son and my granddaughter to see firsthand the place where I spent this childhood.
The place is Amachi. 1 square mile of scrub, cactus, dust, and weeds, where barbed wire still marks the boundaries. It was an ugly time in our country's history. The Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor. Wartime hysteria was rampant.
On December 7th, we were outside talking, and her mother came out of her house and said, "Pamela, you come in the house. You don't play with those Japs." It really hurt. And after that, she never said a word to me. Not one word.
A presidential order sent 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of them American citizens, to internment camps scattered around the country. The Grenada Relocation Center in southeastern Colorado was one of them, better known as Amachi. More than half who were sent to the camps were children. Their families lost everything they had, except for what would fit into one bag.
And so that's when I hear my dad's words, a fine line between hope and despair on a daily basis. You see it, you feel it, you smell it. I mean, the dust that blows in your face.
We had done nothing wrong. We thought somebody had done something wrong, and somehow or another we were being punished for it. even though we didn't deserve it, and there was nothing we could do about it.
So they made do with what they had, and they thrived. They built schools, formed Boy Scout troops, taught sewing classes, ran silkscreen shops, and grew their own food. The young people, old enough, went to war. They fought and died for this country, while their parents were prisoners of the country they served.
We owe so much to them for changing the climate and the acceptance and the respect, things we didn't have.
Those are precious things they have now, and they have now become the treasures. As the years pass, those who are making the pilgrimage each year become fewer and fewer.
Imprisonment of our elders was not our defining moment. That our defining moment was that they didn't let that stop them.
It's a desolate place, seemingly devoid of human life. Along the Purgatory River is the largest known site for dinosaur tracks in North America. But look closer, and you start to see the unmistakable mark of man.
There was a real ethnic mix in this area.
On the rock walls here, rock art known as petroglyphs, carved into boulders more than 1,000 years ago by predecessors to Native American tribes. The area is known as Picket Wire Canyon, a name that comes from the corrupted, anglicized version of the word purgatorio, or purgatory. It got that name when Spanish conquistadors died here without last rites more than 400 years ago.
Because they didn't have the benefit of clergy, they couldn't go on to to heaven, and they were stuck in purgatory.
The name stuck, but more people came here anyway, mostly for one reason.
It's got the Purgatory River, which is one of the few perennial water sources in southeast Colorado.
It's hard to tell from what you can see now, but at the height of its population in the 1880s, between 400 and 500 people lived here in Picket Wire Canyon, among them the Lopez family. After the Homestead Act of 1862, settlers from all over ventured here, lured by the idea of owning 160 acres. Anglo-Americans and Hispanics, like the Lopez family, lived side by side. The Lopezes came up from New Mexico in the 1870s and eventually built this church, known as the Dolores Mission.
It's not a mission as you would traditionally think of as a mission. What it is a Catholic church with a cemetery around it.
The cemetery, a resting place for nearly a dozen people, mostly Hispanic children under the age of 3, like Eugenio Padilla, who lived only 7 days back in 1899.
Some of the headstones are very ornate and very elaborate, so you can tell that the folks here, even with these children, spent a lot of time and care to give them a proper burial.
The headstones are in good condition, but as people left the canyon over time, many of the old homes succumbed to the elements. The U.S. Forest Service acquired the area in the early 1990s and oversees it as part of the Comanche National Grassland. They have since done some work to preserve what's left here, but they say there's more that can be done.
It's really a kind of a special place.
In Picket Wire Canyon, Maya Rodriguez, 9 News.
Just so many people came in here.
And so many memories were formed right inside of Pierre's Supper Club.
You talk to people that have been coming in here for 40, 50 years and how they enjoyed it.
The restaurant has changed hands over the years. Randall Bourne currently owns the business, but it was his cousin, Lawrence Pierre, who started it all.
We started here and then we got famous all over the country.
Johnny Cochran, Bill Clinton, Scottie Pippen. You got Bronco players that always came down.
When in Denver, they all came to Pierre's for the fellowship and for the catfish.
Down in Louisiana, there's one thing about the people down where we're from. We know how to season food real good.
Talk business, politician, everybody come here.
One of those politicians,
I even held a cabinet meeting in there one day,
is former Denver Mayor Wellington Webb.
A lot of the political agreements were hashed out in Pierre's over cocktails and then out into the neighborhood.
A neighborhood that's quickly changing with new construction popping up.
In about 90 days, this building will not be around anymore.
Construction that will turn this property into townhomes.
You know, we're not in the business of putting people out of business.
The building is co-owned by David Bergner. He bought it in December from the bank, never knowing exactly what he was buying.
All we knew it was not a historical building and could be demolished. So that's why we proceeded with our plans.
It's true that Pierre's is rich in history, but because paperwork was never filed to make it a historical landmark, it will soon close.
Getting it ready to fry.
So for the last time, Mr. Pierre and Randall cook up some catfish for old time's sake.
It'll float. It'll come and talk to you.
Pierre's may be closing, but for the many people who have enjoyed a meal and made a memory, there's no forgetting what this place means to Denver.
Remember, it's a good place to come and eat. They'll be talking about Pierre from now on, you know.
Reporting in Denver, Megan Fitzgerald.
All right, see y'all.
9 News.
The right for all Americans to be heard is a right not lost on the students of East High School.
5 every 6 weeks.
Maya Thomas and Darren Fother are just 2 out of a group of students who organized the walkout at East.
The whole Michael Brown situation, I felt personally angered by.
So we wanted to do something nice and something sort of powerful out of morality, so we did the walkout.
Take a stand right now!
And schools across Denver followed suit.
We got cops killing black people.
These actions led to a promise made in the library of East High School during a press conference with Denver Police Chief Robert White, other city leaders, and Darren Fother.
First, we reached 50, and then we reached 100, and then we reached 1,000.
The issue of race is a huge one for America.
Mayor Michael Hancock and Chief White promised to meet with the people, public forums for all, for students, to address the issues of race and police relations.
That's what we want. We want people to pay attention. We want people to talk about what's going on out there.
I am absolutely listening.
Chief White says it's key to create a good relationship with students.
If we can get them engaged now and let them know that we value their voice, when they become adults, the chances of us having a better relationship as a government, and specifically as a police department, is going to be much greater.
White says across the city, officers must make a better effort to go into the neighborhoods to reach out to students.
In other words, they want to know who the officers are. And the key to our job in being successful is people knowing us and trusting us and us treating them with dignity and respect.
What we do reflects on what happens in the future. So if we want our future to be different, we have to make it different.
Exercising their right to be heard.
So I definitely think they listen to us, Chief White especially.
Fighting for a nation that is truly for all. Nelson Garcia, 9 News.
The crowd at Sea Film Center was excited to see a little bit of Hollywood in Denver. Edwards James Olmos mingled with the crowd, who also came to support the Cine Latino Film Festival.
I've lived more than 45 years of my life giving back to the community. And in the turn, the community has given back to me a life that I could never have dreamed of.
Premiering at the festival is a movie that Olmos is producing called Water and Power, directed by Richard Montoya.
The film is a very different kind of movie. It's extremely powerful, very direct, and extremely well written.
A story of brothers that would test the bounds of love and loyalty.
There will be many topics covered in this 4-day festival, from immigration to familia. But Olmos says there's still work to be done to represent Latino heroes in history.
I think we have a lot of room for doing great films about our contributions to society as a whole and as to the world in general, you know. I'd like to do a story about Corky. I'd like to do a story about Dolores Huerta. I'd like to do a story about, any one of the many, many, many Medal of Honor winners that we have that are Latino.
Contributions that should be celebrated year-round, not just 1 month out of the year.
I think that we don't need a Hispanic Heritage Month. We need to eliminate Latino film festivals.
Just be integrated.
Yeah, come on, there's only one race. That's the human race. And inside of that human race are great cultures. There's Latin cultures, Caucasian cultures, Asian, African, indigenous. And I'm pretty much saying that what Corky said many, many years ago in the 50s. Corky Gonzalez is my idol. And I think that he said it best. He said that, I am Joaquin, we are who we are, and we're proud of it.
1,
It's perhaps fitting that in a former church,
We feel that spirit.
the spirit still moves.
It's a hallelujah moment. Aha.
And she moves too. A lot.
Sometimes my husband would say, why did you kick your leg up like that? And I was like, honey, it's because I just feel like it, and I'm glad I can. And he'd say, that's really not necessary.
Dance is Cleo Parker Robinson's life.
And I loved theater.
And parts of her 65 years of life have come together on stage.
Every part of the works that I've done, I can identify a time in my life.
Even the most painful times.
My brother died in his sleep of a heart attack at 19.
Sorrow that inspired.
I was only 21. And I had to create. The pain was so great. Mary, don't you weep. So there are 3 Marys, and they all try to hold each other together. You know, that's what women do.
A personal piece.
This is an excerpt from To My Father's House.
One of many in the upcoming show simply called Cleo on Cleo.
We brought back some of my older works and new works.
Works that have taken Cleo Parker Robinson
Tandu beautifully, darling.
and her dance ensemble.
It's one of the first pieces I ever created.
Around the world.
From Kenya to Nigeria to Germany, all over Italy, Bulgaria, Istanbul, everywhere.
Quite the journey for the girl who was told she'd never dance.
I had a heart attack at the age of around 10 or 11, and then I was hospitalized, and they said I would never move.
But in fact, she's always moving. And sharing her life's journey filled with dreams.
That was my greatest joy.
And dance. With photojournalist Byron Reed, Rhonda Thomas, 9 News.
It was a fascinating place to grow up. A childhood of unbelievable. Just wonderful.
The memories still seem so fresh for 2 sisters who once called this place home.
We'll always have memories of this house.
The house is known as KUSA Mayan. It sits on the 9th Street Historic Park in the heart of the Auraria campus, all that's left of a vibrant, thriving neighborhood. 90-year-old Marta Gonzalez Alcaro and 96-year-old Belen Gonzalez Aranda, along with their 5 other siblings, grew up in KUSA Mayan.
A lot of people don't understand that this was a very sustainable neighborhood.
To understand what happened here, you have to go back, way back, to the 19th century. The clapboard wood house is one of the oldest in Denver, originally built in 1872 by William Smedley, a Pennsylvania dentist who moved here. Years later, in 1926, the Gonzalezes moved in, and the surrounding Auraria community was thriving with families from all over.
We didn't think anything about it. You know,
no, everybody
we had an Irish family across
Yeah.
the street, a German family, English family.
So, and we never thought of being different. We were all, in the same boat.
It really exemplifies America because it was a history of immigrants from all over.
Gregorio Alcaro is a historian and founder of the nonprofit Auraria KUSA Mayan Heritage. Marta Gonzalez Alcaro is his mother, and he remembers parties and get-togethers at KUSA Mayan.
And I couldn't separate my family's history through the history of Auraria, and that's how I became interested in learning more about the various families and the stories that they have to tell.
Those stories include hardship, the Depression, and later, World War II. But once the war was over, the family entered a new venture. On the first floor of their house, they opened one of the first Hispanic-owned Mexican-American restaurants in Denver, calling it KUSA Mayan.
We had a mother that could make us meals out of nothing.
And those skills were put to use in the restaurant, which also became a cultural center. President Harry Truman ate here in 1948, and through the 50s and 60s, entertainers like Jose Feliciano, Joan Baez, and Judy Collins all made stops at KUSA Mayan.
And we always had an open house situation here all the time because we had musicians and poets and, entertainers coming all the time.
But those times would not last. The Gonzalez family continued running the restaurant until it closed in 1973. By then, the Denver Urban Renewal Authority had designated the entire neighborhood as the future site of the Auraria Higher Education Center.
It was a loss. It was a big loss emotionally and, for the whole family.
The philosophy was that we needed an urban renewal in a lot of the older communities. And Auraria was just one of many ethnic communities that went through this challenge of displacement.
Despite some community opposition, in 1969, Denver voters approved a $6 million bond issue that would help create what would become the Auraria campus. 155 families and 237 businesses were relocated. Some never bounced back from it. Bulldozers moved in, but preservationists raced to save historic homes, including KUSA Mayan. The state eventually created the 9th Street Historic Park. Now, there's an effort to tell people who visit KUSA Mayan that it's not just another building.
And this is why these homes were very special to the Mexican Americans and people from Mexico. They went through incredible struggles through their journeys from Mexico.
For the Gonzalez sisters, those struggles are sweetened by happy memories whenever they come home to KUSA Mayan.
All my family, they all appear somehow or other. They're all here, as far as I'm concerned. Everything reminds me of one of them or all of them. And it all came from living in this wonderful home.
With photojournalist Manny Sotelo, Maya Rodriguez, 9 News.
The cover of the first book that featured an African American clearly shown.
He may not look like a comic book hero.
And I love superheroes and the battle for truth and justice and equality and fairness. And I think that's what drew me.
But Professor William Foster is a hero for comic books.
All comic characters are stereotypes. It's where we start.
He's a nationally known comic book historian from Connecticut.
Welcome this morning.
Here to talk to people in Denver.
Stop reading them funny books is what they said.
About the changing image of African Americans in comics.
You can trace almost by decade how our progress in this country and how treatment in this country had changed over time.
Foster believes these are not just funny books. Comics, he believes,
no one knows,
are insights into the psychology of the times.
Where black people were being portrayed as, superstitious people with real big lips and fright wig hair and holding a shield and a spear. And
from the caricatures of the 30s and 40s.
I never get mad at history. It was what it was.
To the empowerment of the 60s and 70s.
This is John Stewart, the Black Green Lantern.
Foster says comic books play a big part in history because of their role in shaping the minds of young readers over time.
Because that's what we are. That's how we learn. We learn by stories.
What makes him a comic book hero?
Black Lightning is 1977.
Are his efforts to preserve history. He's contributing to an exhibit at the Blair Caldwell Library in Denver and towards efforts around the country.
This is Willie Mays.
Trying to help the next generation remember how things used to be.
If they found you reading, they would kill you.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Much of the pioneering comic books portraying black characters are disappearing. Many of them destroyed or never distributed.
Stacks of those books came back to the publisher. No one will put them on the shelves.
Now Foster has launched a movement to save these underground comics from extinction.
But the V of people behind me has gotten much larger. So I'm not the only one anymore.
Not the only one trying to be a hero.
Nah, not just funny books, although you still can find some funny books.
A hero for the truth.
Whatever story someone tells becomes the truth. Or there were no black comics. That becomes the truth, okay? Nobody in the black community was doing it. Why should we do it? That's not the truth.
With photojournalist Byron Reed. Nelson Garcia, 9 News.